Lenine, welcome aboard. Thank you very much, and welcome to everyone into session 3.1 here. Now, the thematic for this session, the two papers that we'll be hearing from, is links between activism, pedagogy, and children, particularly in that context. Now, in that context, I have to note we've got a change to the schedule. Kerry McKay could not present today, so her paper will not be presented, but hopefully we'll be able to include it in the conference proceedings a little later. But fortunately, we are joined by Lenine Bourke, an independent scholar and academic, recent PhD graduate of Fair QUT here, as I recall. Lenine, you may recall, was unable to present back in day one of the conference, so it's absolutely wonderful that we've been able to include her today, even if it is at the expense of poor Kerry, who's sick. So I have mixed feelings, obviously, on that note. But look, let me just, I feel like you've probably got a little bit of a sense of where Lenine is coming from, because we've just been listening in on her amazing work in the art from the margins space. But let's just note that she's an artist, researcher, producer, and consultant who works with the public, creating new work together to explore ideas about the future that we want. They recently completed a PhD at QUT in artist-led public pedagogy, and they continue to work in outdoor places to explore our community's ongoing adaptations to climate change. Lenine has been the Executive Director of Young People and the Arts Australia Artistic Director of Contact Inc. and the Director of Community Partnerships at the Australia Council for the Arts. And she's currently the Manager of Art from the Margins, a studio and gallery in Brisbane and in Fortitude Valley, as I just learned there a minute ago, working with thousands, if not, well, hundreds of artists. So that's wonderful. Lenine, your paper today is entitled, I've lost my notes, sorry, I've turned the page.
A long title, don't worry.
Walking through the process together, unpacking a creative work with human and more than human publics as an artist pedagogue in the condition of indeterminacy. Thank you very much, Lenine, and we'll give you a brief clap. Thank you.
Thanks, Charles. Okay, you can tell I've just finished a PhD because my abstract title's too long, can't you? Okay, I'm going to make this work. So let me see what you can see. Okay, so I'm just going to, does it work if I put it on full slideshow at your end? Because I kind of can't see things. Great. Okay, look at that. So I am going to read some of this just for the sake of speed. Thank you so much, Charles, for inviting me and everyone being able to accommodate my move because my little mate was sick last week. So before I start, I just want to acknowledge that today we are meeting on the unceded lands of the Turrbal people. And for the sake of togetherness, I just want to acknowledge that we're actually in a whole bunch of places all across this country and maybe internationally, and pay my respects to all the elders, past and present, and those that will take leadership into the future. Also to acknowledge that this country was never ceded, and you know, I heard Professor Chelsea Water go randomly on B105 last night doing a kids pickup, and I heard her say, you know, sometimes when white folks get angry about race politics, things might change within their own mob. So I'm not going to get angry today, but I did want to share her observation. Also, I would just, because I can't see anyone, I just wondered if the folks that were online would be happy to just flick their faces on for a minute. I know you might be eating or doing other things. If it's too sensory, I understand it. But sometimes it's strange. Hello, yes, I love it. Sometimes it's weird to just kind of talk to yourself. And also feel free to go if you want to. But hi, everybody. Really nice to see some faces. So welcome to Walking Through the Process Together. This is going to be kind of like a little bit of a degestation. It may not make sense, and it's definitely not in any hierarchy, but just some ideas that I wanted to share, hence the confusing long title. So in order to understand the ideas that I want to share today, first I need to talk about me as an artist-led researcher and a research-led artist. I've always worked in collaboration with people, humans in places, about important issues that people want to see addressed, changed, or advocated for change. Then I started a PhD in public pedagogy, considering my work with the 10-year-long projects that I had collaborated on with many children, young people, families, and communities across the world called the Walking Neighbourhood. Here is a glimpse of that past work in the Bagot community in the Northern Territory.
hundreds of people have taken up the opportunity to experience life in a Darwin Aboriginal community through the eyes of a child. The youngest residents of the Bagot community have taken visitors on a walking tour of their home. The community opened its doors to the public this weekend as part of the Darwin Festival.
They're not your average tour guides, but these young Bagot community residents couldn't wait to show off their home. More than 100 people went on the walking tour, with traditional face painting one of the first stops. The children told stories about different parts of their community, including this car wreck they turned into a musical exhibit featuring their own voices. They answered questions from the curious visitors about community life and also showed off some of their favourite pastimes. And the crowd also got a taste of their sense of humour.
And the kids just taken so much pride in the community, which is really good.
So you can go back in and check all the places that we've been. There's some missing, and you can also check the second time we went back to the Bagot community as well if you want to. I'll just come back to this one now. So fast forward, that was just a glimpse in my 15-minute presentation to how many people I work with, so that you understand. We advertised 85 tickets, and I think 250 people showed up for that first show. We had aunties, uncles. It was part of Darwin. We did 4 shows over a weekend. We flew people in. We ended up having to take a snake on a plane home. It was a whole story, right? So I just wanted to show you that, because this is sharp contrast to what happens when you try to make a public work during a pandemic and it's a PhD work. So during a pandemic, universities, and my university, QT, was very hesitant to let me to do anything with humans. So I found a public site, this one, the Tarragindi Reserve, a suburban patch of bushland with a scouts hall, an outdoor mini amphitheatre, which you can kind of see in that image up here. A fire pit, a childcare, 2 artist studios through jugglers, a creek, a bike path, houses on the perimeter, a toilet block, and a lot of more than human residents that lived here. So while my research question was much bigger and looking at how I could enact a kind of public pedagogy that actually led to the use of Biesta's idea of togetherness, my performance making needed a particular concept, because you can't just sort of try to implement one theorist article in a whole performance work and have it have meaning for me. So my interest was in developing a public performance work to explore the ways in which non-Indigenous people like me could consider our relationship to the place we live, leaning very strongly into First Nations scholars, artists and activists in the climate change space. I was also working with the sensory experience of performance making. So my First Nations colleagues and friends were growing up knowing that they are a part of this place. And this is kind of reference, but I'll just paraphrase, that they were talking to me, and they're telling everybody actually that the health of the place means their health too. Whereas when I was growing up, I was taught through the public pedagogy of my white upbringing and the togetherness of the people that I lived with in my non-Indigenous community and family, that everything from a place was a resource available for my benefit. Now, just to segue so you can see how much the place in which I grew up and those beliefs were core to me, not only as a colonizer and settler, but also in fact was still playing out at the start of my research project. I was professionally comfortable with this idea of indeterminacy. Whatever happens in the process, that's kind of okay with, even though, you know, I want to pass this study. However, that was always in relation to people, which in my growing up, I grew up with a family that were very working class Irish Catholics who were very much into supporting people, and they understood the justice of people rather than the justice of place. But inside my white human body, this was something I still had to experience as part of my professional and personal experiences. So I found the perfect place to make the work after much searching. However, as an artist who had always worked with humans, I was still trying to push my approach onto a space. It's such a colonizer thing to do, and bring in humans to do it with me. I was like bringing more white people in with me to the space, including my daughter and a close friend in these photos. And while this was interesting and I was able to find emergent ways in which we could be together in this place, it was not going to push my practice into the area which I was interested in studying, which was about leaning into the First Nations experience, to the sensory experience. So I proposed and planned a 5-week residency after I kind of pulled my head in and realized very quickly it would have to be a more than human collaboration with me as the human mammal. That the animals, the plants, the buildings, the fixtures, the textures, the smells, the sounds, the plastic, the rocks, they would all eventually become my research collaborators. And I thank them in my PhD exegesis acknowledgements, which Charles will remember I kind of got asked, someone asked me about it in one of my seminars I had to do. The kookaburra who laughed at me every morning and night that I was in residency, and I took it really personally thinking, oh, this is funny. The kookaburra thinks I'm an idiot. When actually then I did a bit of research about it, and it's how they mark their territory for eating. Or the tawny frogmouth who would be in the same tree every single morning, and I would kind of greet them as though they were my friend. What I noticed was they were beautiful at being a listener, they were beautiful at being still, and they helped me settle into a place. I would draw with the charcoal I found in the fire pit and eventually do that in collaboration with children from the childcare centre and watch over many days the sandy creek that exists there, which 50 years earlier had full-size turtles in it, change as the weather changed. And that was the first image on the front page with Lawrence English coming to do some work with me. As the weather changed, I changed. I was there every day and that's what I saw. So in the process of my everyday, I decided to make a field guide, which would eventually come into play for the final work that I made called Everyday Ecologies. Now, because of time, and I've still got some stuff I want to say, I'm just going to let this upload. Okay, so I don't have time to go into everything, and let's see if I open this up, if that'll work out. There we go. But I made a new work, which has actually really become a new methodology for me. Exploring this invitation, I realised another work following on from this one at the Bleach Festival at the Gold Coast. So this is me kind of answering some of the human context. So this was a series of illustrations, drawings, writings, documentation. It was also, I published it and bound it and gave it to every public member that came to the actual performance event that I hosted. It gave you 5 sites, and each site, as I showed you there, was based, one was a smell site about handling the issues of compost. It's a pretty rancid concept, but we weren't there. Touch, I ended up having to be really confronted by images that I thought were violence in the landscape, which were actually native plants doing their best to protect other plants. Sandy Creek became this beautiful place that I still visit every week. And I worked with Lawrence English. He did some in-creek recordings that we installed in some speakers in the rocks so that you could actually have hear the noises that the insects were making. Weirdly, after being there for 5 weeks, or I never heard another person, then on the day of my actual PhD piece, there were about 500 children playing soccer on the oval right near the creek. So it actually just completely continued to push this idea of managing to be in the sensory under it in a colony. That's the creek. Trees have photosensors in their leaves like we do in our eyes. They've got more than us actually. So they can see blue light, yellow light, they can see light and dark. So this was an invitation to create a portrait of yourself the way a tree would see you. And then there was a tasting site of native foods. These are all found objects through my time there. Methodology information. So I tried to share a bit of my thinking and my study and my time there with people. Anyway, this is all available online and I'm happy to share it with anybody if they want to have access to it. Okay. Back to my notes. Okay. So I wanted to embrace the work of scholars around early years educational concepts known as common worlding. So Taylor and Guigny explained that common worlds is a conceptual framework developed to reconceptualize inclusion in early childhood communities. Common worlds take accounts of children's relations with all the others in their worlds, including the more than human. And I decided to apply this concept to myself and then others in an all ages approach to providing the conditions for the public to consider all relations in this place where my final performance happened. This points to a shift and a move away from knowing about nature or even being in nature to learning with those others with whom we are already entangled with. That is nature. I mean, Naomi Klein said the same thing. We're not defending nature, we're nature defending ourselves. Other scholars have also referred to this as the kind of messiness of relations in nature and building on those ideas of connectedness as we are actually animals. We create an opening for these encounters within common worlds, and we foreground ways to build relationships with the unknown. I kept encountering this argument for the timeliness of early childhood pedagogies and scholars to, quote, make a greater contribution to the broader, more than human. And this is Adrienne Baccarat de Castro. Jen Ritchie, in her article titled Early Childhood Education as a Side of Eco-Centric Colonial Counter Endeavour in Aotearoa, New Zealand, challenges humans to learn from Indigenous ways of knowing, being and doing such that their relationship with Earth is generative, situated and expansive. The challenge to early childhood scholarship that the child is not the centre, which a lot of parenting theories take into account, but rather they take into account their relationship with all others, and specifically the push in this field to consider the human and more than human beings. This is an intergenerational argument, and I realized in my own creative process, I was so used to being centre as the creative lead or the researcher or the artistic director of the work. I was now reworlding myself. I was encountering and considering my relationship to the more than human and everything around me. What emerged was a common worlding experience in a contemporary arts process by which humans and more than humans could be together, aligned by the ways that Biesta articulates together as an art of publicness. This was a new process for me to bring an intergenerational public into an early childhood pedagogy of common worlding, and not a framework about it being an early childhood project. This was where the public exhibition happened after you'd drawn your presentation about how you think you're seen by the plants. I read this great article. Oh, and I'm going to talk a bit about the term now. So I read this great article by Karras and Cowell, and it was called The Artist Can't Escape. The artist as, in bracket, reluctant public pedagogue. And while it was a rocking article, I had some really big feelings with this idea of being a reluctant public pedagogue as an artist, because I thought, no, I'm actually really want people to learn things. I've got a bit bossy about it, you know. So in this article, the artists profiled were considered reluctant public pedagogues, probably me 10 years ago. This notion of reluctance, or what I would call accidental public pedagogy, was almost annoying. I felt a little silly saying this, but step into this moment if you have to have one, you know what I mean? It's like a kind of a big push for an idea that meant it kind of really steered my study into thinking, no, I am deliberately going to consider this idea of artist as a public pedagogue. And I wanted to work specifically with public pedagogic outcomes by experimenting with the context of public pedagogy and engaging a contemporary arts research creation-led practice in a common worlding context with a more than human collab. I mean, for someone who was trying to avoid jargon, I got myself into a little bit of a situation. So I wanted to be clear that rather than intention considered as an afterthought, my project sought to underscore intentionality and deliberateness as requisite conditions for contemporary artists to propose new works that would result in public pedagogy outcomes. A bold move, I know, but I had to try and see if it was possible. Who knows? Maybe that's my next study. Now, the metric mob will probably say, well, how did you develop data about, did anybody feel that they'd learned anything? And all I can tell you is that, you know, I've got to do that next. It's the next study. But anecdotally, I'm still receiving emails from people that said that thing that I came to in the forest completely changed my life. I could talk about this specifically all day, but I've got one more thing and I'm really hoping I've got a few minutes to talk about it. Indeterminacy. So I developed 5 conditions of practice, and indeterminacy to me is a condition of artist-led public pedagogy. I wanted to offer this to the field, not as a must-do or a must-have, just something to consider. So this is really about the great unknown. And had I known how unknown my PhD was going to be, I don't know that I would have done it as a PhD. So throughout the interview and analysis process, I became aware of this idea of the unknown. I've known it in my field for a long time, but I conducted 13 interviews with community, socially, politically, ethically engaged artists. And they brought it up all the time. And it's consideration by many artists across a range of practices. Indeterminacy can be considered the moment when the artist's skill set drives the next aesthetic decision, or creative, artistic, whatever you want to call it, design decision. Although a collaborative context would by necessity require wrangling many more circumstances. So discussing this further, the condition of indeterminacy informing notions of togetherness as articulated by Biesser and other public pedagogues, like Burdick and Sanderlin, they describe it as the pedagogy of the unknowable. Ellsworth considers this work in critical pedagogy is most powerful when it demonstrates the pedagogical force of not dictating something. The nature of this unknown quality is significantly relevant to working in a public context, whether you're with humans or more than humans. The idea of the unknown, or as Truman and Springay say, the speculative middle, and being unable to plan for human public engagement was already part of my artistic practice with publics. This nature of the unknown quality emerged as significantly relevant to working in a public context. Sorry, I've said that twice. Artist participants I interviewed for this study identified that knowing the outcomes of a work would lead to less interest in creative work. I mean, controversial, but I agree. That determinacy was detrimental to our creative practices with public. Although conducting a PhD study in a white, productivity-centric institution makes embracing indeterminacy incredibly complicated, 15 ethics proposals during a pandemic, it was through this concept and its emergence in the fieldwork, interviews and literature that I could frame it as an important condition for the artist-led public pedagogue. Interruptions as an act of indeterminacy are enabling conditions for better practices. Notice the interruptions and enjoy them. Through the process of an initial attunement approach to the more than human beings in the reserve in my final residency, I could deeply listen to strategies as a process for working with indeterminacy. And the techniques that I used are similar to, say, a sound artist, like Oliveros, who in her TED Talk said, listening is a mysterious process that is not the same for everyone. One can focus on a specific sound or the entire field of sound. The reason I include this slide up here by Miriam Rose Ungunmer Bowman, she's an elder in the New Way Daily River of the Northern Territory. She's been referenced in many educational contexts as a school principal and many mental health services as a leader, wellbeing and mindfulness. And she talks about the concept of deep listening as Didiri. Didiri is, as it says here, a quiet stillness, an inner contemplation to inform action on a later date and a listening with more than the ears. This is what I think indeterminacy asks us to do. I understand that owing to my identity as a settler with no lived experience for this concept, I do not fully comprehend that the way Didiri is deeply embedded in different First Nation cultures and with different words and communities around the world. I use this idea of deep listening with more than the ears to find my way to indeterminacy. And even if I was hard of hearing or had a hearing impairment, my body listens deeply. Each day in my final residency, I would create opportunities for new artistic ideas for public pedagogy to emerge, not in a forced way, but as Rosie Dennis, Artistic Director of Bleach Festival, said in her interviews, sometimes it's just a few days before a better idea would come along. Indeterminacy is a condition for artist-led public pedagogy because being with people and all other beings within the public sphere provides a dynamic context where very little can be predetermined. I would argue that working in an ecologically rich place, this indeterminacy is rendered even more surprising. As Manning asserts, when artwork entertains the environment, the proposition is that there is an awareness in the field of relation to how the environment is attuned to the gestures active within its ecology. Last slide. And to just quickly explain how significant this work was from the walking neighbourhood to everyday ecologies, here's a collaboration that I just did in August with my friend Nathan Stoneham, this handsome human on this side, where we took that creative ecology of being in a place, and this is at Burleigh, down near where the rocks are as part of the Bleach Festival. We spent 3 weeks in residency asking people about their relationship to the environment and what they would value. And some people told us they valued car parks. Some people told us that they were concerned that it wasn't actually oceans rising, that it was actually sand islands sinking. Some people also told us that by not whaling, we were going to breed more sharks. Other people told us the most wild ideas they had about climate change is completely non-existent. And then on the flip side, we had a series of conversations that was about urgency and how in a relationship you use a red flag and how perhaps maybe nature was giving us a million red flags, and we created an hour and a half long experience for people to explore their relationship to red flags in nature. So moving from, and Nathan has worked with me on all 3 projects as a main state collaborator. So he walked alongside me in Everyday Ecologies and co-designed with me this work, which is called Everyday _, our listening-based work exploring our relationship approaches to place. And this was at the Gold Coast. We hope to deliver a 3rd work in a different space called Everyday Adaptations, which is about literally changing all of your investments. But that's another story. It's set for 2023, so I can keep you posted. Thank you for your time. And like I said before, you can also find me at Art from the Margins, which is my day job, where I work as a social studio in Fortitude Valley with a whole lot of awesome people. Thanks, everyone. I can't hear you, Charles, sorry.
Oh, I've done the classic Zoom thing. Sorry, guys. Now I'm muted. I was just saying, Lenine, thank you very much for introducing, for that wonderful presentation and introducing this new word into my vocabulary, dadiri, which I'm going to be certainly spending some more time with, because it sums up a certain thing that we always do in the studio, teaching or otherwise. I think one of the things that you're bringing forward there about indeterminacy is the interesting thing, and I think your presentation speaks to that, is the way of trying to create and allow that indeterminacy to occur in the pedagogical space actually requires incredible levels of skill and structure and experiences in order for it to take purchase, in order for it to be translatable into action. And that's come through really, really strongly. We didn't get the benefit of the document that you linked to, but Tao has put that into the chat room, so I look forward to checking that out later, and we may circulate that afterward today. Now, I will hold questions over to the end of the session with an eye on the time, and next I'd like to invite, in this case, to the real lectern, the lovely Ria Credo.